There are no stars in the beginning, only the silence between them, that endless gulf of darkness, deeper than any human prayer, older than any god ever named. It was within that silence that something began to stir, something that had never been meant to see this place. The one above all. The architect of light, the thought before creation, the heart of every universe felt a tremor across the infinite. A scream, not of pain, but of defiance. It came from a place beyond comprehension, a realm where the souls of the dead screamed not for mercy, but for purpose. And so, for the first time in eternity, the Supreme One turned its gaze toward the warp. What it saw was not creation. It was madness. A storm of faith, fear, and fury, an ocean of souls eternally devouring themselves. It was beauty inverted, love twisted, divinity bleeding. The one above all did not understand it. Not yet. For it had never known limitation. It had never tasted pain. But curiosity, that divine echo of compassion, compelled it forward. The fabric of reality trembled. The Astronomicon, the psychic beacon of terror, flared with impossible brilliance before collapsing into darkness. Across the Imperium, astropaths screamed as one, blood pouring from their eyes. The priests of Mars saw their sacred logic engines shatter under the weight of unquantifiable light. And deep within the void, where the air itself whispered prayers to the God Emperor, the veil between realities tore open. They said it was a star being born. They were wrong. It was him, the unknowable, the unnameable, the one who had never been questioned. A single ripple of his will passed through the immaterium, and every daemon fell silent. At first, the warp reacted as it always did with hunger. It sought to consume, to define, to corrupt. But this presence was unlike any that had ever entered its sea. It had no fear, no desire, no weakness. It was not a god of war, or lust, or decay. It was the concept of all made flesh, and the warp could not eat what it could not understand. The one above all moved through that storm like light through smoke, untouched by its chaos. The tides of emotion screamed around him, a billion lifetimes of hatred, regret, and agony clawing at his essence, but he only watched. He did not intervene. He simply observed. And in that observation, the galaxy convulsed. On holy terror, the ecclesiarchy fell into hysteria. Some claimed the emperor had returned. Others whispered of a false light, a deceiver sent by the warp itself. Pilgrims flooded the streets, screaming, weeping, tearing their flesh in devotion. They carved holy sigils into their skin until blood pooled beneath the feet of the statues of saints. The God Emperor's visage flickered in gold and crimson, as if even the divine machinery that sustained his image could not decide whether to worship or fear what had come. In the vaults of the Adeptus Mechanicus, a Magos Prime stared into a data stream so bright it burned out his ocular implants. Through the static of collapsing machines, he saw it a figure not made of matter, but of concept. It radiated comprehension. It was as if every law of physics, every strand of logic, every prayer ever spoken, had coalesced into a singular awareness. He fell to his knees, and his last thought before his mind disintegrated was simple: the Omnissiah walks. But this was no Omnissiah. This was something older than gods, beyond binary, beyond the flesh of creation itself. It was truth, walking where truth was forbidden. Far across the stars, within the shattered throne of mankind, the Emperor felt the disturbance. His ancient eyes, though long burned away, opened within the warp. For the first time in 10,000 years, he truly saw something that was not born of pain, and it saw him back. The moment their gazes met, the galaxy stopped. Billions of lives froze mid-prayer, mid-scream, mid-breath. The air turned to glass. The warp quieted to a stillness so profound that even the chaos gods themselves withdrew their gaze. In that impossible silence, two absolute forces beheld one another, one born of light and infinite mercy, the other forged from suffering and sacrifice. The one above all, the supreme architect of existence, and the emperor of mankind, the chained god of a dying species. No words were spoken, none were needed. The exchange was not of language, but of understanding. The one above all reached out not with a hand, but with the intention of revelation. to show this universe what it had forgotten, to remind its children of hope. But the Emperor's light flared in violent protest. He saw what this being represented: purity without price, divinity without suffering. And he knew that if this presence were allowed to linger, the Imperium would crumble, because mankind no longer worshipped truth. It worshipped pain. It worshipped him, the God who suffered eternally on the throne. A perfect God would make his sacrifice meaningless. And so, the Emperor resisted. Psychers across the Imperium convulsed. Warp storms erupted in crimson and gold, swallowing entire sectors. The Eye of Terror trembled as if a new sun had been ignited within its depths. And through it all, the One above all continued to gaze calm, unshaken, divine. For the first time, the Supreme One felt something akin to sorrow. Here was a universe where faith had rotted into chains, where salvation required the endless burning of souls, where every light was fed by the darkness of a billion forgotten lives. It was beautiful in its tragedy. It was creation without kindness, order without grace. And yet, within that misery, there was meaning. The One above all descended further, its essence brushing against the cold wind of holy terror. The skies turned white. Every prayer machine, every vox, every banner, every hymn fell silent. Time itself hesitated. Then a whisper, soft, like the voice of memory. "Do you believe in me?" Millions answered in unison: soldiers, priests, slaves, and sinners. Their voices echoed through the void. "We already have a God." And at that declaration, the One above all understood. It did not belong here. This universe had no room for perfection. Only struggle, only sacrifice, only the eternal grind of flesh and faith. The One above all turned its gaze toward the Emperor one last time. Their lights intertwined, like twin suns devouring each other. No hatred, no violence, only realization, the tragic recognition between two beings who both bore the weight of everything. For a moment, all of creation held its breath. And then he stepped fully into Warhammer 40K, a being of boundless light descending into a realm built on blood and despair. The stars screamed, the warp wept, and every soul, from the lowest serf to the mightiest space marine, felt it, the arrival of something so absolute that even the chaos gods dared not speak its name. The One above all had come, and the universe would never be the same again. The Imperium of Man has survived for 10,000 years upon a foundation of fear, obedience, and faith. Faith not in kindness, not in mercy, but in the promise that suffering has meaning. But when the light of the One above all entered the galaxy, that foundation cracked. It began on terror. Within the Cathedral of St. Balfour, a cardinal screamed mid-sermon as his flesh turned translucent, his voice twisting into echoes of infinite hymns. He saw visions of a light that was not the Emperor's, a purity untouched by agony. The congregation fell to their knees, but not in worship. They fell because their bodies could no longer bear the contradiction. In orbit, the High Lords of Terror argued until blood filled their throats. Another false god, spat the Fabricator General, his mechanical lungs hissing, a daemon cloaked in radiance. But others trembled, whispering, "What if this is the one the Emperor served?" Such words, spoken aloud, were treason, yet they spread like wildfire through the Vox networks, through the dreams of billions, through the prayers of the desperate. On holy Mars, logic engines screamed as they tried to define the light's properties. Every equation looped back into infinity. Every code fractured into paradox. The priests wept machine oil tears, their faith in the Omnissiah shuddering. One Magos whispered, "If this is the source, then all our gods are but reflections." He was executed an hour later. Yet even as his body burned, the Mechanicus could not help but look up to the impossible radiance that seemed to watch them from beyond the void. Across the galaxy, the light traveled faster than warp, faster than comprehension. Ships lost to the Immaterium for centuries reappeared intact. Planets long thought exterminated whispered back into the Astronomicon. Some called it a miracle. Others called it the beginning of the end times. And deep within the Golden Throne, he stirred. The Emperor had not spoken in 10 millennia. His mortal shell, mummified and entombed within the golden machine, had long since withered. Yet his mind, a sun chained within a cage of flesh, flickered. For the first time in countless eons, he felt something approaching that was not his own reflection in the warp. A presence, serene, untainted. It moved like truth itself, and for a moment, even the warp feared to touch it. The Emperor saw it, and the light saw him. It was not a meeting of eyes or bodies, it was the collision of two infinities. For the briefest instant, all of reality was a mirror. He felt the boundless compassion of a being that had never known war, never known guilt, and the one above all, in turn, felt the sorrow of a god who had built his empire on corpses. They understood one another completely, and that was what made them enemies. On the surface of terror, the ecclesiarchy tore itself apart. Some priests claimed this was the true god of all, the one even the emperor had once served. Others called it heresy. Temples ignited. Cathedrals crumbled beneath the weight of billions, crying out to two different deities. In the streets, processions of pilgrims burned themselves alive, believing their souls would reach the radiant being that now watched from the heavens. The Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle, opened fire on them, chanting psalms through tears. Flames consumed the devout and the blasphemous alike. The Administratum tried to suppress the chaos. Vox channels were silenced, archives were purged, but it was too late. Humanity had seen something more perfect than the God Emperor. And once seen, perfection could not be forgotten. Even the Astartes felt it. Space Marines on distant battlefronts paused mid-battle as visions struck them golden light, reflecting off their armor, whispering, "You were not meant to suffer." For warriors bred only to die, the idea was unbearable. Entire chapters turned their guns inward. Others prayed harder, screaming until their throats bled, begging the Emperor to eclipse that foreign light. Meanwhile, in the depths of the warp, the Chaos Gods stirred uneasily. Their palaces of sin trembled. Khorne's rivers of blood boiled to mist. Tzeentch's infinite labyrinth flickered between possibilities. They could not comprehend this new invader, for it offered neither worship nor rebellion. It offered only understanding, and understanding is death to chaos. The daemons screamed in confusion. "Is it of us?" hissed Slaanesh. "No," murmured Nurgle. "It does not decay. It forgives." Forgiveness was poison to them. Even the architect of fate could not predict what came next. The warp itself rippled as the one above all's essence brushed against it. Each ripple devoured nightmares, rewriting them into silence. For a brief moment, every mortal dream became peaceful, and the warp recoiled, shrieking. The Emperor felt the tremor and spoke, not in words, but in thought that rippled across every psychic mind of the galaxy. "This is not your world." The one above all replied without sound, only through presence. "All worlds are mine, for all are born from light." The Emperor's aura flared. His psychic flame, the beacon of mankind, blazed brighter than ever before. But his fury was not pride, it was terror. He saw what would happen if this being remained, how the Imperium would crumble not by blade or chaos, but by the truth that divinity could exist without suffering. Mankind's God could not compete with perfection, and so he resisted. The golden throne trembled. The light of the Astronomicon pulsed wildly, flooding the void with waves of unstable brilliance. Millions of ships were torn from warp space. The barrier between reality and immaterium screamed, and in that storm of impossible energies, the one above all reached toward the Emperor's mind, not in aggression, but in empathy. It sought to heal what had been broken. It sought to end the cycle of pain. But to heal this universe is to unmake it. Faith, that cruel and beautiful force, began to collapse under the weight of revelation. Priests saw their gods dissolve into light. Saints bled gold from their eyes. The Imperium's entire spiritual structure shattered. In one hive city, a missionary looked up at the sky and whispered, "If this is salvation, may he never save us." And thus, the prophecy of damnation was fulfilled not by chaos, but by clarity. Truth had entered a world that could only survive through lies, and the lie began to die. Far beyond, among the silent ruins of Cadia, a lone inquisitor watched the phenomenon unfold through the shattered glass of his void ship. He recorded his final transmission. "I have seen the face of God. It is not wrathful, it is not merciful, it is indifferent, and that indifference will kill us all." By the time the light reached the outer rim, tens of thousands of worlds had fallen into chaos. Faith had become weapon, and truth had become heresy. The Imperium's greatest strength, belief, had turned against itself. In the warp, the Chaos Gods began to whisper a new name, not in hatred, not in fear, but in awe. The light beyond the throne. The one above all had come, and humanity, in its blindness, had mistaken truth for temptation. There are storms the galaxy has learned to name, red tempests of rage, sweet blizzards of pleasure, labyrinth winds of change, and the green rot that falls like rain. But what poured across the immaterium now had no name. It was a light that did not burn, a truth that did not demand, an understanding that did not bargain. It moved, and the warp remembered it had once been a mirror. Within the brass citadel, where mountains wear skulls like snow and rivers boil with vows, Khorne felt it first, not as fear, but as absence. The bellowing arenas faltered, axe chant and chain rattle slid into hush. Countless champions, forever dying and forever rising, paused mid-swing as if the weight of their hatred had been briefly set down. Khorne's throne cracked along an invisible seam. He rose, iron flesh exhaling steam, and listened to a silence made of mercy. "Who unmakes battle?" the blood god growled. The answer was not a sound. It was a possibility that rage might be forgiven. His fist closed. The silence bled. In the impossible fortress, where stairways step into themselves and thoughts molt into new colors, Siench tasted the arrival like a splinter in prophecy. His million eyes blinked out of sequence. Books screamed as their letters rearranged into words no daemon dared to read, no scheme, no price. A wave of probability rolled backward, undoing 7,000 years of plots with a shrug of compassion. "Unwritten," he hissed, talons tapping on the surface of a dream. For a being whose essence is becoming, the one who is and needs no alteration was heresy. In the garden where joy is decay and love is the patience of rot, Nurgle's laughter caught in his belly like an unripe fruit. The kindly grandfather of despair lifted a swollen leaf and found nothing beneath, no mildew fable, no tender scab song, only a clean space where ruin refused to root. He felt a tenderness that was not his, a solace without sores. "Ah," he sighed, and for the first time his flies settled in confusion. A cure that asks for nothing. In palaces jeweled with nerve endings, where every sigh is a blade, Slaanesh paused mid-symphony as an unfamiliar note sounded. Fulfillment without excess, beauty without hunger, love without consumption. A mirror cracked. The Prince of Pleasure leaned closer to the fracture and saw a face that did not want. Desire shivered and, for a breath, became appreciation. The choir missed a beat. Across the immaterium, daemons forgot their names. Some burst like soap bubbles, collapsing into the concept they once parodied. Others stumbled into shapes too simple for torment, gazing dumbly at the light as newborns gaze at hearthfire. The great hosts recoiled not from pain but from clarity. The one above all's presence made vice look like a costume a child might tire of. On a dead craft world adrift between shoals of unreality, an Eldari Farseer cast the runes and found them smooth as river stones, their carvings worn away by an understanding older than fate. She wept, not from joy, but from the knowledge that even salvation comes too late for a people already singing their elegy. We were exquisite, she thought, and exquisitely doomed. The light did not argue. Within black libraries sealed by memory and soul iron, sorcerers of the thousand suns felt their labyrinthine bargains grow thin as cobweb. Dust forms trembled. For an instant, the curse of their unraveling paused, as if the law that had damned them were embarrassed by its cruelty. Magnus felt it through a crack in regret. A hand extended across everything that had ever broken, inviting without command. He reached, and the hand did not close. The grey knights, sanctified in pain until pain became prayer, knelt in their fortress monastery as a sensation like the opposite of trial flooded the chapels. Many cried out in gratitude not at deliverance, but at the proof that their whole existence had meant someone might never need to become like them. In the echoing vaults, a Justicar whispered, "If this is our end, let it be gentle." His brothers answered with steel still in their gauntlets. The light pressed deeper into the warp, not as a spear point but as a dawn that simply arrived. Reality's tide slowed. For a heartbeat of creation, nightmares found no purchase. The ocean's surface went glass smooth. Beneath it, the leviathans stared upward, unblinking, uncertain of a sky that did not glare. Then the eye of terror dilated. From its rim, palaces, pits, gardens and galleries unfurled like flower and wound. The four assembled, not in truce, but in the posture that ancient predators take when a new sea rises around their island. Between them stood no ground, only the idea that even gods attend court when their food learns to pray in a new direction. Khorne's voice was a hammer on cathedral bone. "Name it." "Name is concession," Tzientch murmured, "but concede we must. It is a pattern without need for change." "A kindness without fever," Nurgle mused, stirring a cauldron that refused to boil. "A desire that ends in satisfaction," Slaanesh sighed, turning a broken shard of mirror between elegant fingers. "How dull, how unbearable." They spoke not to each other but to the wound in their world, the place where the one above all's being intersected with hunger and remained unbitten. The warp shook not from battle, but from the realization that an ecosystem built on appetite had met a presence that did not eat. On Cadia's grave, where memorial stones drift like ash, a single guardsman whom history had not bothered to name floated in a ruptured drop pod, his rebreather fogging with each shallow breath. The light found him, as it found everyone. He remembered a childhood pet, and forgave his father for the bottle and the belt. He forgave the commissar who had executed his friend for retreating half a step. He forgave himself for not dying bravely. Then he died, unafraid. The warp twitched, confused at a soul that offered no hook to snag upon. The black ships that harvest psychers felt their cargo quiet. Children who had howled in sleep now slept. A confessor walked the decks, rosary clacking like teeth, and dared to speak to his God. "If this is you, my lord, take me." The light did not take him. It left him enough. In the noctilith crown of a nameless heretic, instruments howled as negative miracles registered, cults dissolving, pacts voided by simple changed hearts. An entire warband of the word-bearers setting down their weapons and singing an old lullaby their mothers had taught them. The heretic gouged his augmetic eyes out to stop the data. The data continued. And yet, because this is Warhammer, and the dark is honest, mercy had consequences. The warp current that had carried fleets, fueled witch-sight, and answered prayer with blood thinned. Astropaths felt their throats unclench, their minds brighten, and their messages falter. The Astronomican's beam wavered like a candle stubborn in a wind that meant well. 1,000 crusades stalled between stars. Relief became peril. Pilgrimages became famines. Empires are engines that run on necessary cruelties. Remove the necessity, and the engine chokes. The Chaos Gods felt it, and smiled with new teeth. "See," Tzientch said, arranging destinies like a gambler fans cards. "Even perfection has side effects." Khorne laughed, a sound like siege works collapsing. "If mercy kills them, let it. I only ask that their last breath be a challenge." Slaanesh tasted the air, found the after scent of contentment, and shivered like a bored predator. "I will teach them to miss the craving." Nurgle patted the rims of his unboiling cauldron. Every cure invites a new disease. Beyond their banter lay a terror none would admit. The dawning understanding that they could not feed on a people who did not bleed the right way, and that this light could teach bleeding to stop meaning anything at all. So, the counter-litany began. Whispers slipped into dreams, not the old lures of lust or wrath, but subtler threads. "You are unworthy of a love that costs nothing. You are safer with the pain you know." Mortals woke clinging to suffering like a relic, ashamed at having felt peace, hating themselves for the moment of ease. Priests roared that comfort is the devil. Commanders preached that doubt is treason. Mothers taught their children to fear kindness as a stranger's trick. Chaos did not need to promise ecstasy. It only needed to promise familiarity. In a fortress monastery on a storm-racked moon, a chapter master watched his chapter fracture along hairlines of revelation. Half begged to take the light into their oaths, to become swords that refused unnecessary wounds. Half swore to carve that softness out of themselves with purer pain. The master listened to both, then prayed to a throne that had never answered with words. The light brushed his cheek like a father's hand he barely remembered. He did not know whether to weep or rage. On Prospero's ruins, a shard of Magnus gazed at the horizon of Never and spoke to the presence that had refused to bargain. "Teach me," he said, "not to unmake fate, but to forgive it." The light did not teach. It was the lesson, and it passed on, leaving a silence in which even a Primarch could be small. And at last, at the heart of dread, the eye's pupil rippled, and they stepped forward. Not the four, but what remained when their colors bled together. A figure woven of oath, want, rot, and change, a chorus in a single throat. "This is our ocean," it said, voice a cathedral of contradictions. "Leave." The one above all did not answer. It revealed. In that instant, every cruelty in the warp saw itself as a failure of imagination. Every temptation looked like a child's dare. Every fear seemed a story that could be told without fangs. The chorus recoiled as if struck. And far away, bound to a golden engine that eats saints by the handful, the Emperor felt the tremor reach him. The light was not attacking, it was clarifying. Clarification would end the Imperium, because the Imperium sustained by necessary lies, sacrificial arithmetic, and ritualized brutality could not be clear and still function. He raised his will like a shield. The Astronomicon flared. Warp storms flowered black on the edges of mercy. Across a million worlds, alarms howled as the old order fought the new truth to a standstill. In that standoff, the galaxy learned a lesson it would spend blood to forget, that even gods are ecosystems, and ecosystems cannot survive a climate they were not shaped to endure. The Chaos Gods trembled not because they were dying, but because they understood they could. The light did not tremble at all. It simply waited, as dawn does, patient as mathematics, certain as forgiveness. And in the pause before everything chose, a thought moved through the souls of men like a forbidden hymn. What if we did not need to hurt to be holy? The warp screamed, and the question survived the scream. There are moments in time when gods must make choices. Not grand, poetic choices of destiny, but quiet, terrible ones, where every outcome is damnation. For 10,000 years, the Emperor of mankind has endured such a moment. But now, the moment endures him. The golden throne groaned beneath the strain of what was coming. The machinery that had kept humanity's God alive flickered, as though even the technology of the Mechanicum hesitated to sustain a will so uncertain. Within that decaying colossus, amidst coils of psychic fire and relics forged from dead suns, the Emperor saw. He saw the light of the one above all stretch across the galaxy like a tide that did not kill, only clarified. It washed over worlds without judgment. It healed, yet demanded nothing, and that, above all, terrified him. For the Emperor knew, a god that does not demand will never be obeyed. The palace was not silent, it never had been. Millions chanted in endless cycles, maintaining the Emperor's life through faith and blood. Servitors bled into golden troughs. Choirs screamed hymns that had long since lost meaning. Yet now, something disrupted the ritual. The prayers began to drift, not toward him, but toward the other light. The Mechanicus data shrines hummed with a frequency that even tech priests could not decode. Every candle burned with colors unseen since before the fall of Cadia. And one by one, the voices began to ask instead of beg. That was the moment the Emperor realized he was losing not his power but his purpose. He turned his mind inward. The warp roared around him like an ocean of molten truth. He had once conquered it, built walls of will, cities of belief, fortresses of command. Now those walls trembled, their bricks dissolving into questions. What if there was another way? What if suffering was never required? And for an instant, a flicker between eternities, he almost believed them. But then he remembered Terra's cost. He remembered the thunder of the Great Crusade, the laughter of his sons before it soured into rebellion, the burning of Prospero, the betrayal at Istvan, the fall of Horus. He remembered 10,000 years of pain distilled into faith. That pain was the Imperium, and to undo it now would be to declare every sacrifice meaningless. He could not allow that. He could not allow them, his broken, loyal, mad children, to believe that salvation could come without suffering. He whispered into the fabric of reality. If they are to endure, they must never be free of pain. The words were not cruel, they were a prayer, a confession. On holy terror, the sky turned black. The light of the one above all was approaching, expanding, no longer merely seen but felt in the marrow of reality. Temples collapsed under the pressure of its purity. Billions fell to their knees, not in worship, but in revelation, their minds unable to contain both gods at once. And within the palace, the emperor made his decision. He reached into the heart of the warp, that seething wound of creation, and commanded it to close. The command was a paradox, a divine suicide of logic. The warp could no more close than a sea could forget it was water. But the emperor did not ask. He imposed. Lightning split the void. Across the galaxy, every psyker screamed. Stars flickered like dying candles. The Astronomicon pulsed one final time, then went dark. For a moment that felt eternal, there was no warp, no chaos, no faith, no light. Only the silence of creation holding its breath. The one above all watched. And in that silence, even he who had never known confusion hesitated. For this act was not rebellion. It was protection. The emperor was not defying light. He was shielding his children from a truth they could not survive. The Adeptus Mechanicus collapsed into madness. Without the warp's hum, their engines became deaf machines, empty, unresponsive. Vast forges froze mid-incantation. Plasma rivers turned to stone. The priests fell to their knees, whispering code prayers that received no reply. On Mars, a voice emerged from the static. The Omnissiah has severed the machine from the soul. Then silence. The ecclesiarchy fared no better. The cardinals could no longer hear the emperor's whispers, and so they made their own. 1,000 sects were born in an hour. Some preached that the emperor had fallen, others that he had merged with the false light to create a new divinity, the dual god, half flame, half dawn. Millions died, proving which half was correct. Meanwhile, in the eye of terror, the chaos gods howled in triumph and terror. Khorne roared as the rivers of blood vanished into nothingness. Tzeentch screamed as prophecy lost its scaffolding. Nurgle's garden wilted, deprived of the decay it needed. Slaaneish's echoes of pleasure turned hollow. For the first time, chaos had nothing to feed upon, and in that starvation, they understood the Emperor's gambit. He would rather kill us all, hissed Tzeentch, than let us see what comes after him. And perhaps, for once, the liar spoke truth. The one above all did not retreat. He observed as he always had. He watched the Emperor's desperate defiance, the breaking of laws written before time, the self-destruction of a god for the sake of his flawed creation. And he felt something he had never known before, pity. He saw that this universe did not reject him out of pride, but out of necessity. It had been built on sacrifice, and sacrifice cannot coexist with wholeness. To remove the pain would erase the meaning. And so, for the first time in all existence, the one above all stopped trying to save. He simply wept. Not for himself, not even for the Emperor, but for the truth that perfection, when imposed upon imperfection, becomes cruelty. The warp barrier solidified. A great shell of silence wrapped around the galaxy. Outside it, the light of the one above all flickered, dimmed, and folded upon itself, not destroyed, but exiled. Inside it, the Imperium staggered, crippled, blind. The Emperor's light returned dimmer, colder, but his own. The Astronomicon reignited, a bleeding sun of psychic fire. Humanity cheered, not knowing that their god had just condemned them to another 10,000 years of misery. And deep within his golden tomb, the Emperor sat unmoving, surrounded by the ashes of what he had done. He no longer spoke. He no longer wept. He simply endured. The one above all lingered beyond the barrier, whispering into the void, "You could have been free." And somewhere in the warp, faint as memory, came a reply, "Freedom kills meaning." Outside the galaxy, the light withdrew into itself, not defeated, but wiser. For the first time, the one above all understood pain not as punishment, but as choice. He turned from the Milky Way, carrying within him a fragment of what he had seen, a god who ruled not through love, but through necessity, and a species that would rather die than be healed. As he departed, the stars flickered like dying candles, and the warp began to stir again, thin tendrils of madness reawakening in the vacuum his mercy had left behind. The silence ended, the suffering resumed, and the Emperor, alone upon his throne, whispered the only prayer both gods would ever agree upon. So be it. At the edge of the galaxy's new silence, the light did not leave. It lingered not in defiance, but in consideration. For the first time since the first thought became the first star, the one above all had met a truth that did not yield to understanding, a civilization that insisted suffering was the price of meaning. The Emperor's choice had not merely closed a door, it had shown the Supreme One, a shape of love that was sharpened into a blade and called necessity. The light turned inward and found a question waiting where answers used to live. If I am all, why can I not be this? He moved along the outer skin of the warp barrier like dawn moving along a fortress wall. No strike, no siege, only the patient gravity of recognition. On the far side, reality stirred and bled in familiar colors, prayers paid for in flesh, engines fed with saints, victories measured in graveyards. Within that music of iron, a note sounded he had never heard. It was small, almost embarrassed, and it said, "Remain." So he remained. He looked back upon the warp. He had nearly unmade that fever ocean where fear and longing breed gods and understood at last why it exists. The warp is not a mistake. It is a ledger, the sum of debts mortals write to justify the lives they cannot bear. Every entry is a wound, every total is a hymn. To erase it is to rewrite the arithmetic of meaning, and to rewrite meaning is to kill a people more thoroughly than any war. The realization hurt. It was not the pain of injury. There is no claw that can reach an infinite. It was the pain of seeing limits and choosing to keep them, a sorrow vast enough to make divinity feel small. He reached through the barrier not as light, but as permission, a thin filament of allowance threaded into the immaterium, and the warp accepted what it could never devour, a presence that did not compete. It did not bless or condemn, it did not ask for worship, it asked to share. The warp shuddered like a fever breaking. Across that sea, the first changes were quiet. Nightmares developed edges that could be set down. Old vows loosened. Some daemons discovered they could stop screaming if they wished. Many did not wish. Identity is a comfortable cage, but the possibility mattered. In possibility, judgment begins. In a storm-wrecked shrine world, a penitent whose back was a map of scars looked up during flagellation and, for the first time, wondered whether his god wanted his healing more than his hurt. The thought did not spare him the lash, it made each strike an honest answer instead of a reflex. The warp took notice. Pain repurposed is less edible. On a black ship, a child whose mind was a beach where horrors broke like waves felt the tide pull outward and leave wet sand a place to stand. She did not become harmless, she became choosing. When the confessor asked what voices she heard, she said, "Mine." The record cherub wrote heresy in neat script. The light did not object. In the noctilith caverns of a heretic world, a lattice of negative miracles hummed as instruments logged anomalies, pacts voided by amnesty, blood rights returning with refunds, curses declining to renew. The heretic added more teeth to the machine and fed it the last of his students. The graphs improved. His eyes did not. In the eye of terror, the palaces of the four reassembled from the near starvation the emperor had imposed. Their feasts resumed with quieter appetite. Even gods respect a close call. Yet something in their food had changed. Rage cut the tongue. Delight tasted like aftercare. Decay hinted at recovery. Schemes included an option labeled mercy, and every time Tzinch tried to delete it, the field returned grayed out. Judgment, he hissed, paging through futures that all ended in self-knowledge. Boredom, Slanesh purred, tasting fulfillment and finding it erotic only when denied. Medicine, Nurgle mused, planting a rot that teaches the body to heal. Distraction, Khorne decided, sharpening war until the first cut became a question. What for? The one above all allowed their comments to pass through him without stain. He was not there to win. He was there to learn. He returned to the barrier and found the Emperor waiting, not as a figure, but as a pressure, the weight of a single will holding a species together by refusal, Between them lay everything that could not be reconciled and one thing that could: care. The Emperor's care is iron. The one above all's care is sunlight. Iron makes prisons, sunlight grows forests and bleaches bones. Both knew their gifts could be cruel when misapplied. "I cannot permit you," the Emperor said without speaking, his thought a continent. "I cannot abandon you," the light replied without insisting, his presence a shore. Between continent and shore lies a tide. The tide rose. A hairline crack appeared where the barrier had been most heroically sealed, not a failure of strength, but a concession of wisdom. Through it, the one above all poured not power but experience. He took into himself a measured draught of the warp, the warsong of Khorne, the labyrinth hum of Tsiench, the patient hush of Nurgle, the silver ache of Slanesh, and did not recoil. He drank until taste became knowledge, and stopped before knowledge became appetite. Within his boundlessness, something fractured. Not a break, an articulation, a joint where there had once been a monolith. Choice requires anatomy. He had made room in himself to turn toward pain without treating it as error. The first shape that formed within that newly flexible infinity was fear not of harm, but of doing harm by mistaking mercy for conquest. The second shape was reverence for a god in chains who had chosen the uglier love because history left him only ugliness to work with. The universe noticed. Comets wrote cursive on black vellum and spelled perhaps. Halo stars dimmed in sympathy and brightened in consent. A choir on Ophelia 7 sang the wrong verse in perfect pitch and did not die. A navigator, staring into a pocket of half-still warp, saw a road that did not need screaming to follow. He fainted, smiling. His house declared him corrupted and promoted his brother. On the craft world that had not yet given up, an Eldari seer pressed her palm to the infinity circuit and felt, for a heartbeat, that the dead were not lost but listened to. She laughed through old grief. The circuit brightened. Somewhere, a mask of Segurach tilted, amused and afraid. In the abyss between galaxies, the tyrannid synapse web quivered. Predation paused, not from conscience but from computation. A superorganism tasted the abstract nutrient of enough and tested it like an unfamiliar amino acid. It did not agree with them. They moved on. On a silent moon, a custodian polished a spear that had ended demigods and thought of a boy he had once been, centuries and surgeries ago. For 12 seconds he remembered his name. For 13 he chose to forget. The light honored both decisions. And the chaos gods, watching the articulation of an absolute into a listener, shivered without knowing why. Predators despise prey that learns to thank the wound for naming the cut. The judgment continued. It was not a tribunal with verdicts, it was an audit of meanings. Worlds that claimed holiness discovered they could not explain why their sanctity required collateral. Orders that glorified sacrifice learned that some sacrifices were just bad math. Crusades paused before gates and recalculated victory and lives spared. A company of Astartes recorded a new oath. Where pain is unnecessary, we will not call it holy. The chaplain burned it. 200 battle brothers memorized it anyway and fought better. And still, the Emperor held the line. He showed the one above all the tallies nobody sees. The feral children pacified by discipline that looks like cruelty until the 10th winter. The planets that live because a petty heresy was crushed bloodily on day one. The border fortresses that do not fall because their commanders believe dying is a privilege. He laid out the costs of softness in ledgers the light could not ignore. The one above all nodded, which for a god is not consent but comprehension. He admitted, within himself, that some goods can only be purchased with horrors, and that to forbid the purchase is to let a worse horror in. The admission formed a second joint. A third followed. The acceptance that even perfect compassion must sometimes stand aside and be called absent. This is how gods change without ending by acquiring joints where pride had been. Change has side effects. The filament of permission. He had threaded into the warp, brightened from silver to gold. Souls began to find it in dying the way a hand finds a rail in the dark. Many refused it. Refusal is a glory all its own. Many took it. Acceptance is a glory with fewer songs. Those who took it did not skip judgment. They learned to pronounce the sentence upon themselves, and then to commute it without cheating. Daemons trying to hook such souls discovered nothing to snag but forgiveness, which slides through claws. On distant Makrag, a scribe in the fortress of Hera revised a catechism line. Where it once read pain is the proof of purpose, it now read purpose is the proof of purpose. He died in an administrative accident. The revision persisted in 1,000 unofficial copies and lowered recruitment attrition by 7%. Victory tasted no worse. On a pilgrim world, a girl painted the throne with 2 lights instead of 1, the Emperor's fire, and an unnamed dawn beside it. The ecclesiarchy burned the mural and her family. Ash smudged the stone into a halo that never washed away. Pilgrims touched it and felt brave enough to love their children tenderly and still raise them hard. The warp, lapping at that shore, found less to drink. At last the judgment reached the place where all judgments must stand, Terra. Not the palaces or the parades, but a sub-basement beneath 20 strata of forgotten wars, where a tech adept with a stutter nursed a failing converter with prayers too small for liturgy. The light entered as a thought, "You are seen." He finished the repair, and, for the first time, did not offer his blood to bless it. The machine worked better. Above him, in the throne, the Emperor felt the hinge of the cosmos turn. It did not swing open, it settled, a position chosen, not fated, ugly and adequate, loving and lethal. He perceived in the one above all's essence an image he had not believed possible, humility. And where a lesser god might have pressed advantage, this one lowered his hand. The barrier did not fall. It thinned in places where trust could breathe. The one above all withdrew the bright of conquest and left behind threads of craft. Small mercies that do not unmake discipline, small truths that do not unhouse faith, small freedoms that do not dissolve duty. He learned the Emperor's arithmetic and returned it, annotated, not corrected. Within himself, the fracture healed over the new joints, and what emerged was not less than all but more articulate. He carried, like a scar that teaches weather, the understanding that in this galaxy, salvation without cost is tyranny by another name. He turned from the barrier and looked once more into the warp, not to annihilate, not to adore, but to adopt what he could bear. A bright seam opened from Terra's shadow to the galaxy's marrow. It was not a rift, it was a root. Somewhere beyond sight, something began to grow. The Chaos Gods felt it as a famine with manners. The Imperium felt it as a rumor of gentler victories. The dead felt it as an audience they had never known to expect. The living felt it as a hunger that lost its teeth and kept its discipline. And the Emperor felt it as a relieved ache, the pain of having chosen correctly in a world where correct and kind rarely rhyme. The one above all did not rejoice. He judged, and found a way to stay that did not erase the meaning earned by blood. He became in part the thing this universe required, not a rescuer, but a witness who lends light without stealing fire. And the warp, uninsulted for once, allowed the tide to turn without a storm. There are births that begin not with crying, but with silence. And in that silence, something divine learns to breathe. At the heart of the galaxy, where the Emperor's fire meets the last echo of the one above all's mercy, a new radiance began to pulse, hesitant, irregular, alive. The warp, bruised and weary from revelation, trembled. Its colors bled together. The black seas turned gold, then crimson, then white, then nothing at all. From that nothingness came the first heartbeat. The adepts who manned the Astronomicon heard it through their screams, a low, steady pulse beneath the psychic static. They called it a malfunction. The Mechanicus called it heresy. The ecclesiarchy called it miracle. None of them were wrong. For at the center of Holy Terra, beneath 10,000 years of blood and prayer, a new star was being born not in the heavens, but within the golden throne itself. The Emperor felt it first. A warmth in the darkness. Not the scorching rage of the warp, nor the cruel hunger of chaos, but a quiet flame that did not ask to be fed. It was small, human almost, and impossibly gentle. He had seen every horror the galaxy could offer. He had become both god and corpse to preserve mankind's will to suffer. Yet this presence did not seek to unmake that will it sought to join it. For millennia, he had believed himself alone, the sole light holding back oblivion. Now, something luminous touched his shadow and said, "You need not bear it alone." At first, he rejected it. A flare of divine will burned across the throne room, shattering entire levels of the palace. Millions died without understanding why. But the light did not retreat. It endured, unoffended, patient as dawn. And when the Emperor finally opened his mind, the two lights met. One forged from agony, the other from grace. Their union did not merge, it harmonized. Across the galaxy, ships that had been lost in the warp found their way home. Psychers wept as their nightmares turned to silence. Astartes on the front lines felt a surge of clarity, an unspoken order to pause, and for one holy minute, war itself stopped. From this pulse of peace, priests began to write new scripture. They named it the Heart of the Throne, a divine convergence of the Emperor's flame and the nameless light beyond comprehension. They claimed the Emperor had purified the invader, made it his own. Others whispered the opposite, that the Emperor had been forgiven by a God greater still. And in that paradox, a new faith took root, the light beyond the Emperor. It did not replace the old worship, it reshaped it, quietly, like roots widening stone. Its believers prayed not for deliverance from suffering, but for understanding through it. They spoke of two divinities, one who burned for humanity, one who endured it with them, and somewhere between those two fires, meaning was reborn. The ecclesiarchy tried to suppress it. Pulpits thundered that heresy walks in light's disguise. Millions were executed. Billions converted anyway. Because unlike the old faith, this one asked for nothing, no tithes, no blood, no kneeling, only reflection. Only the courage to look upon one's pain and call it by its true name, sacrifice chosen, not commanded. For the first time in millennia, shrines grew quiet not with fear, but with peace. For the first time, prayers ended not in screams, but in understanding. And for the first time since the Emperor's ascension, the warp storms did not feed, they listened. But even creation's gentlest miracles invite consequence. The chaos gods stirred again, not in rage, but in unease. Khorne watched battles falter and found himself unsatisfied. Warriors now fought not to kill, but to protect. Their fury was disciplined, not frenzied. Their blood sang of duty, not hate, and duty tastes of iron, not glory. The blood god roared, and the sound was hollow. Tzientch read the new prophecies and found too many endings that did not contradict. A single, stable future whispered to him, and he recoiled. Stability, he spat, is death disguised as peace. Nurgle's garden bloomed oddly. Flowers healed instead of infecting. His laughter grew thin, tinged with nostalgia. He realized his children were learning to live through the rot, not within it. He smiled, then frowned, uncertain of the difference. Slaanesh felt the edge of ecstasy dull. Pleasure without hunger became meaningless. Desire without torment became mere contentment. The Prince of Excess turned their gaze upon the newborn star above Terra and whispered, "You've stolen the sweetness of pain." And though no answer came, they shivered not from fear, but from memory of what joy had been before corruption. Meanwhile, the Mechanicus named it Deus in Machina Perfecta, the perfect machine god. Their instruments detected an anomaly. The Astronomicon now pulsed with two frequencies. One screamed as it always had, in the voice of the Emperor's agony. The other hummed beneath it, soft, stable, infinite. The heretic lords of Mars wept, realizing the truth their data confirmed. The machine prays to itself now. They did not mean blasphemy. They meant completion. Within the warp, something extraordinary unfolded. Where once had been storm, now was rhythm. Where once had been teeth, now were echoes. Daemons felt emotions they could not name. Some dissolved, their essence transfigured into light. Others knelt in reverence, discovering too late that worship can be born of awe, not fear. Even the Great Four paused to watch the horizon as the new star's reflection reached them, faint but persistent. It was not invasion. It was coexistence. For the first time since time began, chaos looked upon order and saw not an enemy, but a mirror that did not judge. And the warp learned that even corruption can love what it reflects. Back on Terra, the Emperor felt the strain of this transformation. His body, if such a word still applied, began to unravel, golden light spilling through the cracks of divine machinery. Every servo, every neural spike, Every psychic node that had bound him screamed with heat. The Adeptus Custodes fell to their knees, helpless. The Mechanicus recorded seismic readings that defied dimension. The Ecclesiarchy proclaimed it the second ascension. And then, the light subsided. The Emperor still sat upon the throne, but now his eyes glowed with twin fires, one gold, one white. And when he finally spoke, not through vox, not through mind, but through silence, the entire galaxy heard the same phrase: "We are not alone." For in that moment, the Emperor was no longer singular. Within him, a fraction of the one above all remained, not as rival, not as prisoner, but as partner. The two had found a way to coexist, neither consuming the other, but sustaining balance. The Imperium would later call it the Bicardia Divinitas, the two-hearted God. And though no human could fully explain it, every soul felt it. A gentler pulse behind the old fire, a rhythm of forgiveness beneath the drum of duty. Beyond the veil, the Chaos Gods watched the new equilibrium and whispered among themselves. "This is not death." "No," said Sinch, "it is adaptation." "Then we must adapt too," growled Khorne. And thus began the slow evolution of chaos itself, the unwilling enlightenment of beings born from suffering. Each would seek new ways to endure in a cosmos, learning that pain and love could share the same throne. From the Eye of Terror to the edge of Ultima Segmentum, a new light spread, subtle, quiet, and unstoppable. The heart of the throne pulsed, and every soul in the galaxy felt, if only for a second, seen. The Emperor endured. The one above all learned. And in their impossible balance, something vast and fragile began to hum. The idea that even in a universe built on horror, grace could find a foothold. A new god had been born, not in defiance of pain, but in understanding of it. And the galaxy, for one trembling heartbeat, was whole. There is a moment after every creation when the universe holds its breath. Not in awe, but in confusion. For it must decide whether what has been born should be called salvation or mistake. The heart of the throne pulsed like a second sun. Its rhythm was not constant. It stuttered, as if uncertain of its own existence. Each beat sent waves through the warp and reality alike, reweaving cause and consequence. Souls no longer fell quite the same way. Faith no longer burned quite as hot. The galaxy did not notice all at once. Change is never loud, it is persistent. On Holy Terra, the cathedrals hummed. Their stone walls carved from the bones of forgotten emperors began to resonate with something gentler than hymns. Choirs sang of blood and victory as always, but between their verses drifted a second harmony, one that did not call for sacrifice, but for remembrance. It was small at first, a whisper between lines, but whispers, in time, become scripture. The Ecclesiarchy called for purges. They sent their confessors, their witch-finders, their living saints. And yet, wherever they burned one heretic, 10 more lit candles of quiet defiance. These new believers did not build temples of gold. They built hospitals. They wrote on walls instead of parchment. They prayed not for miracles, but for the courage to understand why they hadn't come. They called themselves the Witnessed, for they believed that to exist, to endure, and to be seen by both gods was itself a form of worship. The Emperor felt them. Every heartbeat, every prayer. He no longer drew power only from fear and faith, but from choice. And choice is a dangerous energy. For the first time in 10,000 years, he dreamt. He saw humanity not as servants, but as mirrors, each capable of the same defiance that once defined him. In his dream, he walked among them again, not as a conqueror, but as a teacher. He saw them build without chains. He saw peace, not eternal, but earned. He saw his sons reborn, forgiven, standing beside him under a sky free of fire. Then he awoke, and the dream bled away like water on iron, because he knew such a future could only exist in thought, not in flesh. The galaxy would tear itself apart if he tried to make it real. Hope, he realized, was a weapon too sharp for mortals. Beyond the veil, the one above all watched his counterpart in sorrow. The Emperor's defiance had carved new understanding into the infinite. He had taught the one above all something no perfect being had ever known, that love is not the opposite of pain, but its continuation by another name. Yet with that knowledge came a fracture, for the light could not unlearn what it had seen. And so, within the boundless consciousness of the One above all, a shadow began to form, not of evil, but of empathy so deep it bled into doubt. A part of him longed to return to the perfection he had been. Another part longed to remain in the imperfection he had touched. And thus, even the source of all things found itself divided. In the eye of terror, the Chaos Gods gathered once more. They stared across the warp at the faint outline of the new sun burning above Terra, neither of their realm nor apart from it. It was the most terrifying thing they had ever seen, a peace that did not erase conflict, but gave it context. Khorne clenched his fists until the brass of his throne ran red. "This light steals glory from battle," he spat. Tsiench's laughter was quiet and bitter. "No, it steals meaning. What purpose has victory if mercy redeems the defeated?" Slaanesh exhaled, their voice trembling. "What pleasure remains if all pain is understood?" And Nurgle, ancient, weary, and wise, whispered, "It is the end. Not of us. Of the game." For the first time since the dawn of chaos, none of them struck. They simply watched. Because even hatred has sense enough to fear extinction through irrelevance. Across the Imperium, the Adeptus Mechanicus sang to their machines, but their chants had changed. Where once they had begged the Omnissiah to awaken, now they thanked him for resting. For the machine god, too, had heard the second pulse within the Astronomicon and understood that divinity does not live in perfection, but in function fulfilled. Engines ceased to hum like prayers and began to hum like trust. The old dogmas still held. They would hold for another 1,000 years. But even in dogma, a hairline fracture had appeared, and through that crack, light seeped. In the far reaches of Ultima Segmentum, a war between two forgotten human empires ended in silence. Both commanders had seen the same vision the night before. A throne of gold, beside a sea of glass, and two figures standing upon it. One crowned with light, one bound in flame. Neither speaking, both weeping. When morning came, they surrendered to one another. No treaty, no victory, only acknowledgement. Their descendants would later call that day the Truce of Two Lights, and though it changed nothing on the map, it altered everything in the soul. But not all hearts could bear the paradox. To many, the coexistence of grace and cruelty was unbearable. Some declared war upon the new faith. Others fled into the void, seeking a universe still ruled by simplicity. They built fleets of disbelief, shouting into the dark, "There can be only one God." The warp listened and answered in kind. It birthed new daemons, not of lust or rage, but of certainty. They devoured ambiguity. They drank from the wells of doubt. They were made of those who could not live without an enemy. Thus was born the fifth sin, conviction without compassion, a weapon against both chaos and light alike. And so, the cycle turned again, for even revelation breeds monsters. On Terra, the Emperor watched it unfold, and the One above all felt him watching. Across that sacred distance, they spoke without voice, one through fire, the other through stillness. "We gave them choice," said the light, "and they use it to destroy." "They are my children," answered the Emperor. "Destruction is their mother tongue." "Then why love them?" "Because they try." There was no reply, for even infinity had no counter-argument to hope. In the end, the two lights, the Emperor's burning gold and the One's endless white, began to blur at their edges, not merging, not parting, but overlapping in rhythm, like twin heartbeats learning to share a body. The warp no longer screamed as before. It sang a terrible, beautiful hymn of contradiction. Every note said the same thing: perfection must suffer to be understood. And that understanding rippled outward until even the void beyond galaxies trembled with it. 1,000,000,000 years hence, when the stars themselves have burned to embers and only echoes remain, some distant intelligence will find the ruins of this galaxy and wonder what kind of beings lived here, what gods ruled them, what dreams they dreamt. They will find two lingering lights in the cosmic ash, circling one another endlessly, neither fading nor fusing. And if they are wise, they will name them not as gods, but as truths. That even omnipotence must bear the weight of empathy. That even despair can give birth to meaning. that even gods must bleed to love. Somewhere deep within the silence, a whisper crosses eternity, perhaps from the Emperor, perhaps from the light, perhaps from something greater than both. Even a god must suffer to be understood. The words drift through galaxies long dead, carrying with them the final paradox that mercy and wrath, light and shadow, are not enemies, but reflections of the same unending struggle to make sense of existence. And so the universe endures, not in peace, not in war, but in balance. A cathedral of contradictions, upheld by two wounded gods who will never cease to learn from each other and from us.